Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
So today I'm carrying on in the series I began last week on the family called Caring for the Clan. And what we do every year is we do a whole month of talking about family. And this year I'm kind of broadening it out. I'm not just talking about your family, I'm talking about your clan and some of the things that go with that. And I told you last week when it comes to the family and when it comes to individuals, we are identified on a bunch of different levels. Number one, scripturally, it was the nation, and then the tribe, and then the clan, and then the individual family. And we haven't talked a lot about clans in the past, and so we're kind of zeroing in, drilling down on that, and we discovered that the word clan appears in the Old Testament 224 times. And it's an important concept of how we can have our family much bigger than we are. Because what happened is the clans have decentralized, and even families are fragmented, and people find themselves distanced and estranged from their families. So last week I challenged you to draw the circle of your family bigger. So we're going to carry on with that thought. So there's this great story I love. This couple has had their Aunt Virginia living with them for 10 years. And she was a real piece of work. I mean, she was grumpy and nasty and demanding, ungrateful. And finally, after 10 years, she dies. And they're at the funeral. They finish the funeral. They're driving home. And the wife's sitting in the car. And she says, honey, I feel bad even saying this, but I don't think I could take even one more year with your Aunt Virginia. To which he said, my Aunt Virginia? I thought she was your Aunt Virginia. That's pretty good, isn't it? And so today my message is entitled From Cradle to Grave. And we all know that concept. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at this whole responsibility of cradle to grave. So I'm going to tell you a little story from the book of Genesis, actually two stories, because Genesis is bookended with stories of brothers. 2 brothers at the beginning and 12 brothers at the end of the book of Genesis. Now, we all know about the first family in history, Adam and Eve. I like to remind people it was the first dysfunctional family in history. Eve had an eating disorder. Adam didn't wear the pants in the family, didn't wear any pants at all. And of course, talk about sibling rivalry. The first 2 brothers, Cain kills his brother Abel. I mean, this is not a good start, people. And so then God shows up and he says, Cain, where's your brother? And do you remember what he says? He says, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? He asked God this question, am I my brother's keeper? Now, interesting, because God doesn't answer that question because he's got other things to deal with, like a murderer. But here's my question for you. Are you your brother's keeper? Does the Bible teach you if you're your brother's keeper? I mean, if it teaches anything, it teaches that. You go all the way from beginning to end, we find out we are our brother's keeper. It tells us again and again and again that we are responsible for one another, to love one another, to love your neighbor, to love your brothers in particular. No greater love does a man have than to lay down his life for his friend. We are our brother's keepers. Both our biological brothers and our brothers in the Lord and our brothers as friends. No doubt about that. So this is the concept that we learn at the beginning of the book of Genesis. You go to the end of the book of Genesis, and it's the story of the 12 brothers. And of course, I'm talking about the 12 sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel. And so they had their own sibling rivalry problem, didn't they? Remember Joseph? Now, they didn't kill Joseph, but they did sell him off as a slave to Egypt. You know what? These people are not treating their families very well. Do you agree with that? They sell him off. Now, they were going to kill him, but they chose to sell him as a slave. So poor Joseph, he goes off to Egypt. He's a slave. And by the grace of God, because God's favor was upon him, he rises up to become the second ruler in Egypt under only the Pharaoh. And most of you know the story about the 7 good years and the 7 lean years. And of course, we have Joseph. He's administrating this program to stockpile grain so that they can get through the 7 years. Now, some distance away in the homeland, you have Jacob and his family and his 11 sons, and they're not doing so well because they're in the famine as well, but they didn't plan for it. So they come hat in hand to Egypt, not knowing where Joseph is, not knowing that they're going to encounter their brother. But there he is, and I'm going to pick the story up in Genesis chapter 47, verse 11. Listen to this. And Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Then Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with bread according to the number of their families. And of course, the word there is clan. So what we find out, Joseph, who was sold off by his own brothers, he now takes care of not only his brother, not only his father, not only his mother, but the entire clan. And if you go back into Genesis chapter 46, it actually names and numbers who they are. I'll do the math for you and save you the trouble of counting. There was 70 people. 70 people showed up. And Joseph took care of every last one of his clan. He gave them lands and possessions. He gave them bread to eat. He cared for them from cradle to grave. And what he did was he proved that he was, in fact, his brother's keeper. So I'm going to give you a little history lesson. How many like my history lessons? How many of you could do without them? Yeah, there's always a few hands that are going to go up, but you're getting the history lesson anyway because I'm a bit of a history buff. So when we talk about Western civilization, there are three institutions that hold the whole thing up. I'm going to throw it up on the screen. These are the three pillars of Western civilization. This is not true in all other civilizations in other parts of the world, but it is true of the Western civilization. Western society is held up by these three institutions: the government, often called state, the family, and the church. And these three things, historically, for the last 2,000 years, have upgirded and upheld the society as we know it even today. And each one of these pillars has its own and specific role. And so government, or the state as we often call it, this is what the role would be. And I know this will be a bit libertarian, but I'm going to say it anyway. Their role would be this: the rule of law, a monetary policy, and national defense. Those would be the primary responsibles, particularly in a federal government like we have, and services are delivered at lower levels of provincial and municipal and city, et cetera. And the government, the overall government, has a much narrower role than it has today, and we're going to talk about that. Then on the other side of the equation, you have the church, and we always talk about the separation of church and state. And we have this other pillar called the church that we've had very much influencing Western civilization for 2,000 years. There's no doubt about it. We have divided all of history based on the birth of Christ, BC before Christ and AD after, right? And so we look at government, at the church, and what is its role? Its role is to provide the spiritual framework for our society. It is the church that has taught right and wrong. It is the church that has helped us and reminded us to love God and to love our fellow man. It's the church that has taught us to forgive and to care for and to serve our fellow human beings. That's the role of the church in a society. And then, of course, there's the center pillar. I put it in the center because the family, in my opinion, is the most important of all of these. It predated both government and the church. And the family was the foundation. It was the bedrock in which God started all of humanity. And the role of family is so important and so vital because that's where values and character are developed. That is where people literally learn to love and to care for one another, where they actually practice all these things of forgiveness and right and wrong. It's where they learn respect. It's where they learn honesty. And so there's three distinct roles. I hope you can see that picture. And what happens is when any one of them gets out of their lane, when they start mixing up the roles, when they start trying to accomplish the role of one of the other institutions, the whole thing breaks down. And this is exactly what we have seen in our generation. I talked about it last week. I talked about the Quiet Revolution in Quebec and how the government, the provincial Quebec government, had gone and systematically eviscerated religion in Quebec. and took their influence away. And if you look at it today, like I said, they're marginalized, they're irrelevant, and they have very successfully campaigned against the church to minimize its influence in the society. You look around Western nations around the world, and most of them are in that same category. You look at Europe, and you see the influence of the great cathedrals in the past and the Holy Roman Empire. It's all gone. It has all crumbled down. And then, of course, there's the role of the family, which is now being usurped, and it is now being undermined, and it is now being taken away from us. And we are not always aware of that. We don't realize that we have this sovereignty as a family. We have this responsibility as a family that we have been, and I think we bear some blame in it, because we have expected governments to do things for us that the family ought to be doing. And we have elected governments that are making all kinds of promises that they can't possibly ever really fulfill like the family could. And of course, we're very grateful for things like universal health care and universal education. I'm not knocking any of those things. All I'm saying is this: you can't possibly take care of every single need for every single person from a centralized position. You all get that, don't you? It's unaffordable, it's not practical, there's no way you're going to administrate it. So you could look at Cuba, you could look at Venezuela, you could look at Albania, you could look at China, you could look at Russia. And so it's important for us to understand it just doesn't work when you centralize everything. I like to put it this way. How many of you have heard my two cows political theory? Well, it goes like this, if you haven't heard it. So in socialism, you have two cows. The government takes one and gives it to your lazy neighbor. Communism, you have two cows. Government takes both, gives you some milk. In fascism, you have two cows. The government takes both and sells you some milk. In a bureaucracy, you have two cows. The government takes both. They shoot one, milk the other, and throw away the milk. In Nazism, you have two cows. Government takes both and shoots you. In capitalism, you have two cows. You sell one and buy a bull, right? So there's my little political theory for you in two cows. You'll never forget that. And here's the thing I want you to see on the other side of the equation, because we have state that has gone too far and overreached too far. And on the other side, you have the church that tried the same thing. In Acts chapter 2, there was this great centralization. I'm going to read you the story. Most of you will remember it. It's Acts chapter 2. I'm going to start at verse 44, and this is what it says. Now all who believed were together and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods and divided them among all as everyone had need. And you've all read the story in Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 3. They sold their farms, they sold their businesses, they sold their houses. They went and laid the money at the feet of the apostles, and then the apostles started distributing it to each one as they had need. And there are people, even today, Hutterite colonies and others, that think this is the model for Christian people, this centralization, where we all have one pot. Now, here's what you need to understand about this. Why would these Christians sell their farms and sell their houses and sell their goods and give it to the church? And the answer is this: they believed the return of Christ was imminent. When Jesus said, "Behold, I come quickly," they thought quickly meant quickly. They thought it meant days or weeks, not decades, not centuries. We're 2,000 years later, and the quickly thing hasn't happened. Well, we happen to know that with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. No idea what that means. All I know is that the come quickly has not come quickly. And so here's what happened, just so you know. The whole experiment broke down. And I call it an experiment because it never happened before and it never happened again in history, just so you know that. This was the only place in Scripture. It's not commanding us to do this, and it didn't work. Because 2 years later, by Acts chapter 6, they're in a mess, and people aren't getting their daily rations, and people are murmuring, and people are complaining. And the thing only lasted about 2 years because guess what? Jesus didn't return. And don't miss the fact that the whole thing was voluntary. Like, it wasn't commanded. They did this on their own. They thought Jesus was coming, so that's what they do. Now, here's a simple question. I know you all know the answer. So if you were in a care for someone, or you were going to deliver services to a group of people, who would be the most efficient and the most effective group of people to deliver those services? The one closest to the need or the people furthest away from the need? It's the closest. It's a simple thing. So I'll give you an illustration of that. So in Winnipeg, we got all snow in the winter. and the streets have to be cleared. Who do you want to be responsible for clearing your streets? The city of Winnipeg or the federal government in Ottawa? Who do you want? You want the city to clean the streets because they're the ones closest to the need. They see the problem. My point is, what we have to do is figure out, how do we reclaim it? Now, maybe we can't change government policy, but you know what we can do? We can start living the way that we were meant to be living. God has designed us, and we've got to stop expecting government to do everything for us, for the church to do everything for us. The job of the family is to take care of their family from cradle to grave. So I'm going to take the last few minutes here, and I'm going to give you a little romp through the life of Jesus in a little bit different. See, when we look at the Gospels, we see the message of the gospel. We see Jesus teaching. We see the important thing of the plan of redemption. But there are some very human moments in Jesus' life. And what's fascinating to me is that the Bible, the Gospels in particular, cover the life of Jesus literally from cradle to grave, right? It describes the cradle. We know what the cradle was. It was a manger. It was a feed trough in that stable. We know what his cradle looked like. And we know what his tomb looked like at the end of his life. He was buried in a tomb hewn out of the rock with a great stone put in front of it. So we have these moments in Jesus' life, very human moments, that aren't about the gospel and they're not about his teaching. They're just human moments. And I'm going to go relatively quickly through 4 of them and just point out to you his family life and the dynamic there, and maybe some things we can learn from this. So here's the 4 moments in the Gospels: the cradle, the teenager, the wedding, and the grave. So the whole thing starts with the cradle. We know that. We have Mary and Joseph. She's pregnant. There's a census has been called by Caesar, and they have to go to Bethlehem. And here's what it appears to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see the clan with them. Where's the rest of their family? I see them traveling to Bethlehem. Maybe the rest of the family had to go somewhere else. I don't know. And anyway, they end up in Bethlehem. There's no room in the inn. They have no family there, clearly. So they end up in this stable. The baby is born in this stable, as you know, we laid in the manger, the cradle. And then we have this terrible situation when Herod, the king, finds out that there's a newborn king. Then he puts out a hit on the kid, right? And not only him, on every male child under the age of 2 will be executed, murdered. I mean, such a treacherous thing. So now Mary and Joseph have a real problem. They're going to have to deal with this situation, and they flee to Egypt. And I'm wondering if you've ever thought of the price they paid to flee to Egypt. They would have given up everything. They didn't go back to Nazareth, so that meant they gave up their family. They gave up their clan. They gave up, they probably had a home. They gave up their home. Joseph gave up his career, he gave up his job, and off they went for 2 years to Egypt. You say, how did he afford to do that? Well, remember some friends dropped by? We call them the wise men, and they brought gold and frankincense and myrrh. It wasn't to make them fat and happy and rich. It was to deal with the fact God had provided a provision for them when they went away to Egypt, and the gold obviously did that. So here's the point I'm trying to make. When it comes to family, when it comes to the cradle, when it comes to newborns, there is a tremendous sacrifice that you have to make to bring kids into this world. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Is there anything more needy in this world than a newborn? I'm going to say this sensitively, but they're so useless. I mean, the newborn comes into the world, it can't do anything. It just lies there. It can't do anything. It doesn't know how to eat. It doesn't know how, barely. It doesn't know how to walk. It doesn't know how to talk. It can't move. It can't even hold its head up. Just head flopping around like this. You gotta carry it around like it's a $500,000 Stradivarius violin, because if you hold it wrong, it's gonna break and die. And it doesn't go on like that for days. It goes on like that for months. You think, when is this kid going to learn how to do anything? It eats, it poops, and it cries. And you know, they're cute as a button, but so hopeless. I mean, the amount of effort you have. Is there any creature on this planet that is as much trouble as a human baby? I don't think so. Given how fragile and how needy human babies are, who do you think in this whole world would be the best and most equipped person to take care of them? Their parents. Their parents. And the fact that we try to consider other ways that other organizations can take. And we hear things like national daycare programs, and that's wonderful, it's noble, it sounds so good. But at the end of the day, who do you really want raising that child? Who do you really want spending those first and formative years with that child? Do you know that a child learns more in the first 6 years of its life than the rest of its life put together? Do you know it learns all of these things? Of course, it learns how to walk and talk, and its moral foundation is established. Do you know that a child can learn in the first 6 years to speak 4 languages? How long would it take you to learn 4 languages? 600 years is how long it would take most of us, right? And these babies grow up, and even though they start slow, the amount of information they can take. And it was Rudyard Kipling, you all know Kipling, and he said this. He said, give me the first 6 years of a child's life and you can have the rest. What was he saying? This is the most formative and important time. And there's really no one else that should be raising that child, because nobody is going to love that children like you are. And I'm not telling you what to do about all these things and struggles and jobs and all that. I'm just giving you a principle here today. It is so vital. So the first thing that we look at is the importance of the cradle. The second thing is we have the teenager. And Jesus' teenage season is actually talked about in a very brief way. Now, he wasn't a teenager. He was only 12 years old, but he was at that stage where a Jewish boy becomes a man. Today they call it the bar mitzvah. And he was taken to the temple in Jerusalem. And when they left, when the feast in Jerusalem was over, they were going home, heading back to Nazareth, and they'd forgot something. Who remembers what they forgot? Jesus. They forgot their son at the temple. Now, does anybody remember how long it was before they noticed? It was a whole day's journey. They had traveled a whole day and realized that they forgot Jesus in Jerusalem. He was still in the temple. We know that because we read the story. They didn't know where he was, and they're freaking out. You know why? They thought he was with the clan. And they presumed he was with relatives. He wasn't with relatives. So they turn around and they go back. And then when they got back to the temple, it had been 3 days they had been gone. They lost the kid, the teenager, for 3 days. And when they get there, he's sitting calmly, having a conversation with the priest and outsmarting him, whatever. And they're kind of wigging out on him, like, what are you doing? Like, it's his fault. I don't think this is Mary and Joseph's finest moment. That's what I'm saying. This was their home alone moment, right? You've all seen the movie? I mean, how do you leave Macaulay Culkin at home while you go on Christmas vacation to Europe? I mean, who does that? And I mean, imagine Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern showing up to harass him and the little kid outsmarting him. And the worst thing is about this story is it happened again. Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. The same 2 goofballs, Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern. Are you kidding me? I heard it was a true story. Anyway, here's the most important thing I want to say about these teenage years. Don't miss this. Mary and Joseph took their teenager to church. Now, they didn't do a good job with everything else, but at least they took him, right? So that's the first thing to remember. So we have the cradle, we have the teenager, we have the wedding. Jesus' wedding? No, not Jesus' wedding. I'm talking about the wedding in Cana. And so you remember what happened was they ran out of wine. Right? They ran out of wine. And apparently, Mary is really uptight about the fact that they've run out of wine, which can only mean one of 2 things. Either she was a lush and needed another drink, or maybe, and I think this is the better answer, I think she was part of the family. I think it was a family wedding. I think what was going on there. And she was somehow intimately involved in this wedding. And I joked about this a couple of months ago. I got some real good feedback on it. I joked that the reason they ran out of wine was because Jesus brought his 12 uninvited friends and they drank it all. And I had some angry viewer write me a letter and say, Pastor Mark, don't you even read your Bible? It says, then the disciples were invited. And the answer to that is, of course they were invited. This is a clan wedding. It was a family wedding. So that meant Jesus could bring his friends. The invitation probably said +1, not +12. But nevertheless, he brings all 12 of his friends because if they were his friends, they were part of the family. That's how the clan worked. So, of course, they were invited. I get that. Now, here's the point I want to make. So they've run out of wine. Mary's wigging out on this. And I just want to pause for just a moment before I go any further. Did you notice that Joseph is not in this scene? And in fact, Joseph is in no scenes after that, and that's right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And most scholars believe that Joseph died sometime between Jesus age 12 and age 30. Somewhere in between, we don't exactly know where. It doesn't actually tell us in Scripture. All we know is that he's not there and there's no sign of him anywhere. And here's what you need to know, is that Mary, Jesus' mother, ended up as a single mother. We never think of it in those terms, but it was absolutely true. And so there she is, and she's wigging out, and Jesus does this miracle. He turns the water into wine. And then theologians have been scratching their heads on this, and they said of all the miracles that he could have done as his first miracle, why did he turn water into wine? And the simple answer is, his mother told him to. That's why. And I'm not joking about this. You go read the story. She wanted him to do something about it, and he did something about it. And here's the point I'm making on this. I don't care how old your kids are, you're always their parent. And he was 30 years old and still getting bossed around by his mom. I'm in my 60s and still get bossed around by my mom. And you know my mom. And so we have the cradle, we have the teenager, we have the wedding. Last and final thing is the grave. And let me begin this part with a little question similar to the question I asked you a moment ago. I said, who would be the best equipped to take care of a newborn? You're going to hate this question. If you had an aged parent who was infirm and needed help, who do you think on this planet would be the most best equipped person to take care of that parent? The answer is, and I know you don't want to say it, it's you. It's you. And in a world that values their empty nest syndrome and being able to do things and travel and whatever, and we've pretty much expected the government to take care of that. We want homes and care homes and all kinds of things. And again, I'm not criticizing anybody here. I'm just saying, who would be the best person? And the best person would probably be us, to be involved in some significant and intimate way. And I could tell you all kinds of horror stories about where it hasn't happened. But I want to finish with one story, and it's the story of Jesus. So we have Jesus in his last moment, his grave moment of his life. And he's hanging on the cross. And he's just bore the sin of all mankind. He's being punished. He's been violated. He's naked. He's hanging there for the sin of mankind. And in that moment, that very poignant moment, there's 4 people present, and they're named. And the first person was John, who claims he's the favorite apostle. There's John. There was Mary Magdalene. There was Mary, the mother of Jesus. And are you ready for this? And there was Mary, the mother of Jesus' sister, also named Mary. Go read it for yourself. It's John 19. It's John, Mary, Mary, and Mary. Apparently, there were not very many good names for women in the first century, and so they just called them all Mary. And it's true, they've done historical research on this. 25% of all women in Jesus' day were named Mary. And it was such a good name, they named 2 of their daughters Mary. How confusing is that? It's like, I'm Larry, and this is my brother Daryl, my other brother Daryl. I mean, when you get a good name, you go with it. It's from the New Heart Show people. Work with me. So, thank you. Thank you. There's always somebody that gets me, and I appreciate that. So here's what I want you to see. You're visualizing the scene. You see Jesus hanging on the cross. It's his last moment. What would you be thinking about? What would you be thinking about in that moment? And Jesus looks down. He sees John. He sees his mother. And he says to his mother, "Woman, behold your son," and looks to John. And then to John, he says, "Behold your mother." And it says, from that hour, John took Mary to his home. Are you catching this? In the last moment of his life, he cared for his aging mother and made sure there was a son from his clan, from his chosen family, from his extended circle of his family to take care of his mother. It is such an extraordinary moment in the life of Jesus. It's so personal and it's so family. And we look at that and we recognize this simple truth. There is no one in this world that can care for one another from cradle to grave better than the family. Let's stand together.
If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. Visit our website at www.churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.